Hi, and welcome to the Future of Dermatology podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Faranak Kamangar, board certified dermatologist. We are here to talk about anything and everything dermatology related. You'll hear from me and my guests who are dermatologists, physicians, experts, scientists, residents, and medical students in the field of dermatology. We publish weekly, so if you like what you hear, hit that subscribe button and show us some love, and thank you for joining us.
Hi, we are back today with none other than Payton Smith, one of our wonderful SF medical students, and we are talking about the topic of itch, which is so important. Payton is just so unique because he does so many things, but among them, he has done a lot of research on this. He just wrote a review article, and we're going to chat to him about it. On top of that, what I learned from Payton last year is that he's actually suffered from this himself. So when you find a clinician and researcher who also has kind of felt things on a personal level, you can't really get a viewpoint better than that. So I'm so excited for today. Thank you, Payton, for joining me.
Thank you, Dr. Kamangar. I want to apologize to everyone already because, as we know, talking about itch usually makes people feel itchy. So I apologize in advance. Hopefully, we can kind of find some pros along with the cons of making everyone itchy today.
I love it, Payton. It's so true. It's like one of those contagious things. It's not actually contagious, but mentally, psychologically contagious among human beings, right? It's such a built-in behavior. When you see someone itching or talking about itching, you start itching.
I think that's part of the biological response is, we used to, as humans, we used to see someone scratching and kind of from an evolutionary standpoint, we began scratching because we're like, oh, well, clearly they have something on them, some kind of bug or something. So I should go ahead and get that off of me. But yeah, it's funny.
It's so true. And then we'll get into it in a second too. And that kind of misconception of itch goes so much into probably why there are it's not addressed much. It's not as like a fun of a topic for people to discuss. So we'll get into that in a bit because it's so important why it's so misunderstood. But before we get into that, do you want to just tell, because itch, I mean, of course, as a dermatologist, I see it all the time. It's super prevalent. When you look at the prevalence numbers, it's so much higher than you think even. So if you want to just lead us off with what is chronic itch, just what's the definition of it, and just the burden size that with prevalence numbers.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. So chronic pruritus is a condition defined by an uneasy, irritating sensation in the skin that lasts for more than 6 weeks. And so that's what makes it chronic. And it affects more than 15% of the population, and 1 out of every 100 doctor visits patients will come in with itch. So it's incredibly prevalent, but for some reason, it's just not given the importance that it deserves. It can be caused from not just dermatologic issues like eczema and psoriasis, but also some really severe systemic diseases like liver and kidney disorders and neurologic dysfunction. And it can even be its own disease, something called chronic idiopathic pruritus, which is something that I've been diagnosed with.
Yeah, then you shared with me too recently a really cool article. I think it was to be in the Atlantic, and if you want to talk about that a little bit, I thought what was really cool about it was the article talked about how pain is somewhat related, right? Like sometimes you don't figure out what someone's pain is, but pain gets so much research and is talked about. And as a society, we have empathy for someone who is in pain. Like if someone is hurt on their body, we go towards them. Like, what, are you okay? Whereas itch in parallel is not talked about. And it's sort of like, if someone's itchy, you tend to move away from them on the subway. So I thought that was so interesting. If you wanted to talk about that article that you sent me.
Yeah, absolutely. So Annie Lowry, like you said, from The Atlantic, wrote this incredible article. And I think every dermatologist, I think every person should read it because just having that perspective of someone who is chronically itchy, I think will just change the way that you view the entire, disease process. So I think something that you said is so important to note that pain, we have entire pain clinics. We have entire fellowships in medicine devoted to just treating pain. But what do we have for itch? I mean, certainly dermatologists see it every day, but there's certainly not a itch fellowship that I can think of. And there are certainly no itch centers. So I think a lot of research and advocacy definitely needs to be done, because something that we'll probably talk more about later, but it is very isolating. People can feel so alone and that no one understands them. I think at best society writes itch off as a minor inconvenience, or like, maybe kind of like a social faux pas, like, oh, why are you scratching yourself in public? That's not, you shouldn't be doing that. And then at worst, it's a sign of disease, of like, oh, that person must have fleas or scabies, or, maybe they're, maybe it's like a psychological process. And obviously people associate a very large stigma with that as well.
Absolutely. And do you feel comfortable sharing about your journey too? Because I was so surprised last year when you told me has it been a few years that you've been diagnosed with this, or how did it kind of get started?
Yeah. Well, that's a great question. I wish I knew. It's been about 3 years now, and actually something that really made me want to go into dermatology, not just to hopefully help myself, but also to help a lot of patients that are going through this, because I do think that I do have a unique perspective in knowing just how debilitating this disease can be. If you can't sleep because you're so itchy, you know, we've had Dr. Bhutani on the podcast talking about if you're not sleeping, everything is off. Your mood is off, your immune system is totally dysregulated, which leads to more itching, and so it's definitely a vicious cycle. And I hope to one day bring hope to patients, continue the work that's already been done, definitely by Dr. Almaraya and Dr. Berger at UCSF and Dr. Josipovich at Miami, and just so many great thought leaders in the field doing really incredible work. And I want to continue that work.
Absolutely. And it's so interesting. The itch saga has changed so much. So, back in the day, a lot of people, which is all we have, and a lot of people are still using things like antihistamines, for example, and lotions. So, I think, and you let me know if you were encountered with this too in your early visits to the doctors to kind of figure things out. But a lot of times you're told to moisturize and barrier protection, which is very important. I still, as a dermatologist, I'm like, everybody moisturize a lot.
Yes.
But I have heard that from itchy patients where their life is just miserable. They're not sleeping. They're uncomfortable. They can't focus. It's like, stop telling me to put on lotions. And then there's antihistamines, which has kind of been debunked, right? Like it's mostly, we now know the sedative effect of the antihistamines, that just because I think this, you wrote in your review article too, about the studies showing that antihistamines worked just as well as like benzodiazepines. So it was really just like, if you knock someone out, then they'll sleep.
Yeah.
But you're not really treating the actual condition. So the non-sedating antihistamines pretty much have kind of been debunked. It's not really a histamine pathway. And then there's a lot of the neural research that's coming in. And you touched about in the review article, if you want to talk about just everything we know about the science that's changed the paradigm of how we think of it. DermPub is the Journal of Innovative Dermatology. We are committed to promoting excellence in dermatologic care through the dissemination of cutting-edge knowledge and fostering collaboration among dermatologists, researchers, and industry professionals. We believe that by sharing innovative ideas and discoveries, we can collectively drive progress and improve patient outcomes. Visit us at dermpub.folion.com.
Yeah, I think it's so interesting, and definitely changed the way that we think about itch. Certainly there are certain types of itch that are mediated by histamine. I mean, especially, allergic reactions and other kind of, allergic processes where, yeah, there's a lot of histamine. We know histamine is a pruritogen, which just means like some kind of protein that's causing itch. But we also know that there are a ton of causes of itch that aren't caused by histamine. And so I think if we are just saying, oh, an itchy patient, here's some, antihistamines, and especially if they're saying, first generation antihistamines, here's a Benadryl, I would really say, we need to start moving away from that because of the sedating effect. And then I do think it's totally fine to, prescribe some second generation antihistamines, but just to blindly throw those at patients, and, say, okay, see you in a year, I think can be really dismissive to patients because, okay, well, what if their itch is not histamine driven? And now, these patients are left with, a treatment that's not working for them. And now, well, my next appointment isn't for another 3 months at best. And so I have to spend the next 3 months in torture. It's literal torture to be itchy. I think in the Atlantic article, Annie was talking about how itch is in like the eighth circle of hell, in Dante's Inferno. So it's like right past the boiling lake of blood, and then it's like eternal itching is right after that. So even worse than the lake of blood. And so I think one quote that I really love by Dr. Koo, and Dr. Koo helped me write this editorial, is he says, "Not every itch is driven by histamine, but every itch is driven by the neural pathway." And so I think a lot of the biologics that are coming out kind of really target that neuroinflammatory response, like Dupixent being, correct me if I'm wrong, but IL-4 and IL-13. And so if you target the neural pathway, you're going upstream of that histamine, of those pruritogens. And so it's like, we know that the nerves have to be involved. So if we can target the nerves, we know that maybe we're not addressing the underlying issue, which I do think is incredibly important. And we should at least try to figure out what's going on, but we can at least provide some symptom relief for these patients, because what are we doing as physicians, or hopefully, 6 more months for me, but what are we doing as clinicians?
Dermatologists, yeah.
Fingers crossed. What are we doing if not providing relief for our patients? You can extend a patient's life by 20 years, but if they're miserable, is it really worth it? You have to ask yourself that question.
You bring up so many great points. We had a podcast episode with Dr. Serena El Maria earlier in the year too, where we talked exactly about that, how the itch is kind of like the check engine light of our body. One, we need to turn it off because, we need to symptom relief, but also like, are we just turning it off? But then there's something like underneath the radiator or something. I don't know, car parts, as you can tell. Some part of your car engine is not working. And are we just turning it? So there's two really important things there. One is the diagnostics and how our diagnostics need to get better and more foolproof. But then the other important point that Dr. Koo always talks about, which I learned so much from him early on in my career, and I think that has in part actually made me hopefully a better doctor, is spend all this time on diagnostics, but you need to get people better right away. And that's his pragmatic approach is, sure, there's all the diagnostics and some people spend months doing biopsy after biopsy and this test and that test. But if the person's just itchy that whole time, you've not done your job. So the two go hand in hand, and the biologics are really changing the story here. So everything we've learned with dupilumab, nimolizumab is incredible what it's doing for itch, like IL-31 blockade. And then the JAK inhibitors, that's a whole thing that's like taking a whole side of the science too. So it's really exciting to see how the JAK inhibitors are doing. And you wrote that in your editorial too. You touched upon, all the things that are coming out. So it's really interesting. I think the therapeutics, one, we need to go to them early, but then they're teaching us a lot, right?
Yeah, they certainly are. And they seem to be doing really well. I think the problem is just that it's not FDA approved yet for chronic idiopathic pruritus. And so, I have no experience whatsoever with prescribing really any medication yet. But I would imagine that it's probably pretty difficult to get it approved for chronic idiopathic pruritus patients, or, I do think we definitely should be considering biologics and presenting them to patients and explaining, hey, we have some incredible medications. Let's try to get them, but also insurance, I won't even get into that, but the probability that, will we be able to get these $60,000 medications available for our patient? And if you're not insured, that's a whole nother topic that we could discuss. But, how accessible are these biologics? And I don't think that the problem is let's not go down the biologic pathway. I think it's how can we make these incredible medications more accessible to our patients and how to get to them sooner, maybe? Because like you said, lotion is incredibly important, and I, swear by that. But also as a CIP patient myself, I know that having like a lotion on my skin can honestly sometimes make me even itchier because it's like, oh, now there's a layer of this like liquid on my skin and now I can just feel it there. And so, I think it's very complex, and I think we need to explain that to patients and say, to really validate their feelings and say like, hey, this is not just some minor inconvenience. This is incredibly complex. And my favorite quote from Dr. Koo, well, I have many favorite quotes from Dr. Koo, but something that he tells his patients is like, hey, this is complex, but if you don't give up on us, we are not going to give up on you. Like, we are here for you. We may not be able to figure out what's going on immediately. We may not be able to get you the right treatment immediately, but we're sure going to try. And if we don't do it now, we're gonna do it at the next appointment or the appointment after that, and just to keep trying.
Want to be a sponsor of the Future of Dermatology podcast? We'd love to have your support. Contact thefutureofdermatology@gmail.com to learn more about getting your message in front of our audience. The Future of Dermatology is not just a podcast. It is a community of dermatologists who care deeply about your health.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that from when he says that too. It's just this going to the pragmatic approach and just being there. And you touch on such a great point. We do all this science on the back end and we're like, cool, we have all these new medicines, but you're absolutely right. The system of even getting to the medicines is really, really hard too. So in a practice, navigating all these things becomes extremely complex, which probably explains also why sometimes patients aren't getting to these medicines earlier, because even just like the practice of a dermatologist to offer these and have biologic coordinators and all this help to get to these medicines, it's like a burden on the whole system. But it's amazing to have clinicians who commit to it, are there with the patient. Like, we're going to get through all the obstacles. And the other thing, to quote Dr. Koo again here, I love that he's really trying to spread the idea of kind of the spectrum, like atopic derm, prurigo nodularis, itch. Like, there is a spectrum, and we have these very arbitrary diagnoses, and then medications get covered for that. And you have to kind of, fit patients into a specific category. A lot of these medicines are approved more like for prurigo nodularis rather than itch, like you mentioned. So if you don't have, 20 nodules on your skin, do we still get you covered? And there's so many little, loopholes that we have to go through. But you bring up such a great topic as because we sometimes just really focus on the science, but you're right, like kind of thinking about the patient's journey. There's all this other stuff that they have to deal with. And then, so what else do you think? I know that the article too kind of talked about just how chronic itch is misunderstood. I just wanted to make sure like we chatted about all the aspects of that. Like you mentioned a little bit about, like if someone's itchy, people will just assume it's maybe a disease process and it's something to avoid. So I'd love to just for a couple of minutes talk about that too. Like, why is it so misunderstood as a society?
Yeah, I think there are many reasons. We briefly mentioned like the evolutionary aspect of it. And I think that's definitely something to kind of give space for is, itch was designed to help us. It's not this, horrible evolutionary thing that just was thrust upon us. Like, it was designed to, if there is a bug or something on us, it was designed to make us scratch it off our bodies. So it's literally a protective mechanism. And so the problem is that, it kind of can get out of control. And even the itch scratch cycle, I mean, the itch scratch cycle also plays a role in an evolutionary standpoint because, okay, well, yeah, if you're scratching something off, well, you might not have got it all in the first time. So you're going to be even itchier so that you can like continue to rid yourself of whatever is on you. But the problem, as we know, is that our bodies kind of go haywire. And then, so now here I am, sitting at my desk, super itchy for absolutely no reason. Like, my skin is healthy. I'm moisturized. I drink water, but like my skin is just, for some reason, it's like upregulated in areas where it shouldn't be. And so something that Dr. Koo talks about for prurigo nodularis is that they've done biopsies, even on healthy skin for patients with prurigo nodularis, and they've found increased pruriceptors, which is really hard for me to say, but these receptors where the body is saying, hey, I'm itchy, even though there's not a nodule there, but the skin itself is changing. And so I think understanding that as physicians and also as a society of like, hey, patients can be itchy for no reason. They can be itchy when there's absolutely no rash to be seen, like in my case, or patients with chronic idiopathic pruritus, like skin looks totally healthy, but these patients are miserable. And just kind of coming at it from a standpoint of empathy and saying, like, it's not pain. It's not something that I really understand, but I know that these patients are miserable and I want to do what I can to help.
And have you had doctors or others just tell you, just don't scratch? What do you think about that? Just don't do it. Just don't scratch.
Yeah, I mean, they definitely come from a good place. And I understand that, yes, we need to try to get these people to stop scratching, myself included. But I do think that it can also be very dismissive to just say, hey, stop scratching. Your prurigo nodularis will literally just go away if you stop scratching.
Right.
Okay, well, maybe that might be true. But like I said, the skin, even in the healthy skin, the nerves are upregulated. There are too many nerves. And so just kind of, saying, oh, if you stop scratching, this will go away. Well, okay. Yeah, but the patient's going to be miserable. Like imagine if you had broken your bone and you were in incredible pain and the only way to get it to stop was to scratch it. But then it was going to come back in 20 seconds. But, at least you had some relief for at least 10 seconds. To me, that is better than being in pain the entire time. And also you have to think about like in pediatric cases, okay, you tell a 6-year-old, just stop scratching. Okay, what is that going to do? Or like the babies with eczema, they literally can't speak.
Can't. Yeah.
So just like wrapping their arms in oven mitts, yeah, maybe they'll stop scratching, but they're miserable. They're so itchy and they can't scratch it. And so it just makes me sad. And I hope that in the future we do a better job of validating our patients' feelings and saying like, hey, maybe we don't have a ton of great options for you at the moment, but the very first thing I want to do is just validate your feelings and say that this is not some minor inconvenience. We know that this is incredibly, like it is torturing you, and we want to acknowledge that. And then offering alternative strategies like cold compresses and, just like gently applying pressure. I mean, I've heard people even say, oh, don't even apply pressure. It's like, okay, well, there's nothing, like you're just going to make them suffer
you need some
for the
solution.
entire time. Like, yeah, you have to offer, if you tell them not to scratch, offer them something else, please. Like, please offer them some sort of solution to the problem.
Yeah, it's again, like going back to if it's pain, it's socially recognized, but with itch, for some reason, it's dismissed.
Would you ever tell a patient, oh, I know you're in pain, but just don't take any Tylenol or anything and it'll go away on its own? It's like, well, yeah, I will, but I'll be miserable.
Have you ever wanted to produce your own podcast? OMG Media Outlet has all the tools and talents necessary to produce and promote your very own podcast, from recording to editing to publishing to promoting. They enable you and your podcast to shine while they do all the work. Contact Steph at omgmediaoutlet.com today to learn more. Yeah. Exactly. So no, it's such an important point to make too. And then the other point that you made about how the rest of the skin kind of upregulates these receptors on the neurons. I think that's such interesting research that's come out that with all of our inflammatory conditions, but even especially itch and now the neural element of it, this move towards treating aggressively earlier, because there is thought that your body, your immune system, your nerves can actually adapt and change to a point where it becomes harder and harder to treat these conditions. So I think we're learning that now with all the conditions is not only don't be dismissive of it, but actually like aggressively treat pretty early to try to, curb this, this trajectory where you're going to develop more and more receptors and just kind of be more more, I would say, like more irritable skin, I would say, in a way, like for a longer amount of time. So you kind of want to almost shut this down earlier rather than
100%.
later.
That's Dr. Botani's whole thing is like, if these patients if they're itchy and they're not sleeping, well, that's going to really affect their entire body. It's going to affect their skin health. And if their skin health is poor, they're going to get even itchier. So maybe we, try to prevent all that from happening at the beginning.
Exactly. And once it starts like a vicious cycle, one thing leads to another, and then other things come up. So treating people, taking our patients seriously, understanding them, being with them, and treating early, I think is the main takeaway. And then the other exciting thing is I'm going to put a plug for our SF Derm meeting coming up in June, which Payton is also planning along with me. It's going to be fantastic. And we are going to have medical advisory boards and an entire itch panel where we're going to hear from all of our speakers. So I just thank you for all your work that you're doing and just getting not only the news out there, but doing all the research on the front ground, and then organizing the events where the physicians can come together to move these things forward, like sitting in a room and saying, okay, well, what are our guidelines? How early do we want to treat? What do we want to treat with first? It's so great to have all the pieces going together.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have to say that I'm incredibly thankful for the people who have come before me and done the really important research, like we've talked about, like Dan Butler and Tim Berger and Serena El Mariah. These people were kind of the pioneers of itch, and we wouldn't be here today without them. And so I want to kind of carry on. I want to pick up the torch and carry it forward. So I'm very thankful.
Absolutely. And then we always end our podcast with what you see for the future of dermatology. Any last thoughts? What are you excited about for the future of itch?
Yeah, I think it's pretty obvious what I'm going to say. Probably what I say almost every time is just new treatments that are coming out. I know that nemolizumab was just approved for prurigo nodularis, and hopefully we'll have some other indications coming out as well. So I'm excited for the relief that hopefully patients will get from these treatments. And I know that I'm excited to prescribe my first biologic one day, hopefully soon, and other medications that I think are incredibly important. So I'm excited to hopefully be a dermatologist and really help these patients.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Payton.
Thank you, Dr. Kamangar. Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Future of Dermatology podcast. Remember to hit that subscribe button and share the podcast with your friends. The more you share and subscribe, the more we'll be able to grow and share our dermatology knowledge. If you have burning dermatology questions, feel free to leave them in the comment below, and we would love to address them in a future episode. And please note that this podcast is not intended to substitute for medical advice from your doctor.